One of the most familiar verses is John 3:16. We looked at John 3:17, where Jesus says that he came not to condemn the world, the cosmos, the creation, but that men could be saved. That's the whole purpose. This is God sending his son, coming and manifest himself in human flesh in order to save, not to condemn. God's not interested in condemnation. He's interested in salvation, in deliverance, in rescuing his beloved creation, his children, from that which is killing them. We looked at John chapter 16, specifically verse 9, where Jesus is talking about coming to convict, the Holy Spirit coming to convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. He says of sin in verse 9, because you don't believe in me. It's the way of thinking and seeing that does not line up with the way that God thinks and sees. And this is at the root and the heart of sin. So we can focus upon the actions that are the result of unbelief, of wrong believing. And we can see the sin that's there. But to cure it is not just to get rid of the action. It is to take care of the wrong believing that gives birth to the wrong actions. Elsewhere, we see the fruit of the Spirit, what it produces, and the works of the flesh, what they are. The flesh is a way of thinking, a way of seeing, a way of believing that shapes our actions. And see, since the time of Adam and Eve, we have followed in a wrong way of thinking and believing. Adam saw himself separate and alone, disconnected with God, and yet God was there. And that's in the story. God shows up in the garden, even though Adam and Eve ate of the fruit. God was not put off. He wasn't running away. He wasn't somewhere else. He was there. And that's the whole picture of God in the garden with them, in spite of their fear, their shame, and their hiding. They were hiding. God wasn't. So I want us to go back to John chapter 3, and we're going to look at verse 18. And something that John says in here, that is quoting Jesus. Jesus says, he says, he who believes in him is not condemned. And in him, he's speaking of himself, the Son of God, the Son of Man. Jesus says, he who believes in me is not condemned. Now, why is that? Well, we read on in the verse, and he says, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. So what's happening? What is Jesus describing to us? He's describing a way of seeing, of thinking, of believing, and it shapes how we live. Adam and Eve experienced shame in the garden, and they hid themselves. Why? Because they saw themselves as separate, disconnected from God, as being alone. And they were making decisions about what is right and what's wrong, what is good and evil, which brings death. And so their way of seeing and thinking was wrong. They believed a lie. Eve was told a lie. If you eat of this, then you can be like God. Yet Adam and Eve were already made in the image and likeness of God. They were like little children who still had to grow and mature in this. The lie was, if you do this, then you can be like God. Instead of saying, but I am made in the likeness and image of God, which is a radical statement when you believe that you're something less, disconnected, have to change, have to become something in order to be connected and to be like God. So Jesus says in this verse 18 of John chapter 3, if you believe in him, if you listen to, believe, and think with the mind of Christ, with the same thoughts, there is no condemnation. You already know who you are, what you were created to be, and your very identity. The problem is when you think different from what God declares, from what Jesus knows, from what the Father knows, from what the Holy Spirit reveals, condemnation is already here. Condemnation is this separation, this I am not good enough, I am disconnected, I am on my own. And it's just not true. And so the heart and the root of all sin, of all the behaviors that are listed in the scriptures, come from wrong believing. They come from believing of thinking, a way of thinking that is separate from the truth. This is why Jesus says later in John chapter 8, he says, then you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Why is that? Because sin is enslavement. Jesus brings freedom. And so, when you believe in him and accordingly think according to the way he thinks, to the Spirit, you truly experience freedom, not condemnation. But the condemnation comes through wrong thinking, which is divorced from, is separate from the way that God thinks and what he says. It's a wrong thinking that is at the root of all of our problems. And we adopted the same wrong thinking that came and began with Adam in the garden.